In the previous video, we created the following student class. The student class contains a constructor, a couple of getter and setter methods, and a toString method. In this video, we will create a new class that will contain the main method to utilize the student class. We'll begin by right-clicking on the project folder and selecting to create a new class. We will call this class Object Array, and we will check the box to add the main method stub. Within the main method, we'll begin by creating the student object array that will hold student grades. We can do so by typing the object type. In this case, we are going to create an array of student objects, so we will type student, followed by brackets, then the name of the array, which we will call students. And we will initialize this array to a size of 5 by typing new student, then a 5 enclosed in brackets. Now we have initialized a student object array set to contain 5 student objects. Next, we will create a scanner object to accept input from the console. We will call this scanner object input. Next, we will use a for loop to prompt the user to enter names for each of the 5 students that will be contained in our student object array. Within the for loop, we will first use a print line statement to prompt the user to enter a student's name. Notice we are using the variable I to keep track of which student's name is currently being inputted. We add 1 to I in this print line statement each iteration of the for loop so that the first student's name to be input will be referenced by 1 instead of 0, and the second student's name to be input will be referenced by 2 instead of 1, and so on. After we prompt the user to enter a name, we will utilize the student class constructor to assign a student object to each index of the student array. Looking back at our student class constructor, notice it requires a string in the parameter list in order to assign a name to the student object in the initialization phase. Now going back to our main method, notice we use input.next when using the constructor. We can do this because input.next will return any string value we supply it, and that string value will be used in the student class constructor to assign a student name. Now this might make more sense if we were to explicitly initialize a string variable in the for loop using the input.next method, then use the string variable within the constructor. However, this adds another line of code that really isn't necessary. Instead, using input.next directly in the constructor eliminates this extra, unnecessary line of code, adding elegance to our code. After all student names are inputted to the console, we will then want to prompt the user to begin entering grades for the student of their choice. To do so, we will create a menu that will allow the user to select a specific student to enter a grade for, using a numerical value. We will need a variable to store the numerical value that the user will input to select a student to input a grade for. We will call this variable studentSelect, and we can initialize it to a value of 0. Next, we will create the menu inside a while loop. We will want the while loop to continue to display until the user enters a terminating value. We will make this terminating value 10. This terminating value can be any integer value as long as it is not a value that will be used to select a student. Within the while loop, we will begin by using a print line statement to add a header to the menu. And underneath the header, we will use a for loop to display all the students' names, led by an integer value that will be used to input grades for a specific student. Notice we are using the getName method we created in the student class to get and display the name of each student. Following the list of students that will be printed with the for loop, we will use a print line statement to prompt the user, pick a student to input a grade, input 10 to stop entering grades. And next, we will use input.next to accept the value the user will input to the console, and we will store that value in the studentSelect variable. After that, we will use an if-else statement to first check to see if the user has inputted the terminating value of 10. If so, we will use a for loop to loop through the student array and print the student data to the console using the toString method we created in the student class. Looking back at this toString method, we can see that it will print the student's name as well as their grades. Now, if the user does not input the terminating value of 10, we will allow the user to add a grade to the student they selected by using the setGrade method we created in the student class. Notice when we refer to the index of the specific student in the student's array, we are subtracting 1 from the value the user inputted. That's because we designed the menu to be understood clearly to a non-programmer, meaning when the user inputs a 1, they are actually referring to index 0 of the student's array. Finally, the last thing we will do is close out the scanner object input once we are entirely done receiving user input from the console. Now let's run the program. Notice we are prompted enter student 1's name. If we did not add 1 here in the prompt, this would say enter student zero's name, which most likely would cause a non-programmer user to question the program. But to avoid that, we did add 1. I'll go ahead and add 5 names for 5 different students. After we input all 5 names, we see the menu in the prompt, pick a student to input a grade. Input 10 to stop entering grades. Let's go ahead and input a grade for Bob. We can do so by inputting 1 to the console and pressing enter. Now notice we are on a new line now. This is where we enter a grade. We could have made this a little cleaner by explicitly prompting the user to now enter a grade. However, this is fine for now as our program will still work as designed. But I challenge you to do exactly what I just said by explicitly prompting the user to enter a grade for whichever student they selected. For now, I'll go ahead and enter a numerical value that represents a grade, and then press enter. After we input the grade, we are redirected to the menu as the terminating value of 10 has yet to be entered. Let's add a couple more grades for a couple other students. We'll add a grade for Jack and a grade for Jill. Next, we'll try to overload the grades for Bob. We'll enter a second grade and a third grade. Now what do you think will happen if we try to enter a fourth grade for Bob? You can see we are prompted, maximum amount of grades have been inputted. Last grade not added. Perfect. That's exactly what we designed our program to do in this case. Now, let's go ahead and input the terminating value of 10. And there you go. We get all of our students printed out as well as the grades we inputted for each of them. Any grade we did not input is represented by a 0. And there you have it. We successfully created an array of objects which saved us the resources of having to create individual variables for each individual student and each individual grade linked to each student. Instead, all students and their corresponding data was stored in a single array object variable in which each student can easily be referenced by an array index.